just fine, Doctor. I got a letter for you.
Oh. Okay. I'll take a few moments here to read this. Dear Joyce, I'm sending you patient Arthur D. Tomasino, age 53, blind since infancy, prognosis incurable until a recent advancement of surgical technique. Now, my friend, you are the only doctor in the world who can restore Mr. Tomasino's sight. And I warn you, he knows it. Oh, looks like you've come from quite a long way to see me.
Wool.
I beg your pardon?
Wool. Your jacket is wool. Beautiful stuff.
How'd you know?
The nose never miss.
All right. What else do you already know about me?
Well, your desk. Indonesian teakwood. Very nice. And your clock is electric. Very good. Very nice. My conclusion, you're a very good doctor. Very rich doctor.
Oh, Mr. Tomasino, you see very well for a blind man.
Well, doctor, 50 years ago, I don't know why, God took my eyes. But all of my life, I have tried to learn all I could about the world. Because in my heart, I had faith that someday God would send me a very good doctor, very rich doctor like you, to give me back my eyes so I could see all I have learned about the world.
I think I know how you feel, but I must tell you that I may not be able to help you.
Why not?
Well, it's rather complicated to explain, but you see, it is true that my operation can restore the eye's ability to see, and we've done it for several people. But you may discover something that they've discovered since their sight has been restored.
Which is?
Well, which is that merely seeing the world isn't the same as knowing what you see.
Doctor, what is it you are trying to tell me?
What I'm trying to tell you...
No. Streets I can cross. With traffic, no problem. Up I know. Down I know. Big, small. I can go to the zoo, and I know all of the animals. I go downtown. I know the streets, the cars, the shops. You must help me. Help me to see the world I have loved so long.
To know the world we see. How do we do it? Over 300 years ago, in 1637, the French philosopher René Descartes performed a rather unusual experiment. He cut a small window in the back of an eye he'd dissected from an ox. Now, he covered the window with a piece of paper. Then he faced the eyeball toward the light. And lo and behold, a tiny image of his room appeared upside down on the paper. And so Descartes became the first man to prove that the human eye captures an image of the external world. Now, he was very excited by his discovery, of course, but he was also very disturbed. He asked himself, how does that flat little upside-down world in the eye become the life-size, three-dimensional, right-side-up world of the mind? Well, 300 years later, psychologists are still asking that question. They're learning that there's a lot more to perception than meets the eye. Visual perception begins with light. Light from the sun makes all things visible. In response to light, receptors in the eyes send electrical impulses along to the brain. Each impulse is a sensation, a recording of something by the visual sense. But sensations are not the same as perceptions. The difference is a little like the difference between sounds and a symphony.
Tutti, 2 before 16.
Without sounds, there could be no symphony. But a complex process in the composer's brain, not his ear, organizes and refines sound into music. Well, the brain subjects the eye's sensations to a similar process. Visual sensations travel to the brain's most complex area, the cerebral cortex. The cortex integrates an incoming sensation with everything the brain remembers about the world. The result is a perception, a mental combination of what the eye sees with what the brain knows, giving meaning to the world we live in. But even a seemingly simple perception isn't simple at all. For example, how does an archer perceive the correct distance from himself to the target? As his eye records its image, his brain rapidly assembles a variety of information. First of all, it already knows that the target is really much bigger than it looks. Because it's far away, the eye sees it as a tiny square. But the brain knows the true dimensions of a target. So it discounts the small image reported by the eyes and substitutes the target's actual size. Our perception of the target is a combination of the eye's image and the brain's prior knowledge about targets. And knowing the target's actual size is one crucial element in judging its distance. The eye records an object like a camera, smaller if far away, larger if close. But the brain remembers its constant or real size. If we couldn't maintain this size constancy, you and I might think that this is a film of tiny toy cars seen close up, not real cars seen far away. And we might think that our archer has a mighty small target to hit. Size constancy is only one clue our brain uses to perceive distances correctly. Look at the street and the palm trees. In the distance, they seem to get closer together until they almost meet. This is linear perspective, another clue to perceiving distance. The brain knows that these lines never really get closer together. The eye only sees them that way. The brain makes use of linear perspective to identify distance. But the eyes do help perceive depth. Each eyeball records its own separate and slightly different image of the world. The individual images are, as we know, only two-dimensional. But somehow the brain fuses them into one image with 3 dimensions. And when the eyes turn inward to view an object close up, tension in their muscles signals the brain that something isn't far away at all. The Earth's atmosphere provides still another of the many clues to distance. This one is aerial perspective. Look at this picture of the New York skyline. The buildings in the foreground are clearer and more colorful than the buildings farther away. The reason? Air pollution, which obscures distant objects. We use this aerial perspective to help judge distances. So, making a bullseye is even harder than you thought. Because our eyes can't see depth or distance, our brain must perceive them. In fact, the brain must work constantly to organize the flood of input from the eyes into a coherent, stable picture of reality. The brain must perceive a structure in the barrage of sensations bombarding it from the eyes, whether or not the eyes report structure. And in general, the brain does a pretty good job of this. But like any complicated process, perception can go wrong. The brain can be fooled. It isn't hard at all to perceive something that you're not really seeing. The brain organizes sensations into perceptions according to its expectations about the world. But sometimes the world doesn't meet the brain's expectations. The result is an illusion. Look closely at the two vertical lines. Which is longer? Obviously, the one on the right. But when they're compared without their angles, they turn out to be exactly the same length. This is the famous Mueller-Lyer illusion. Why do we think that one line is longer than its twin? Psychologists believe that we do so because we're used to seeing these figures in a three-dimensional context, like the inside corners of rooms or the outside corners of buildings. Both have a depth dimension. An outside corner projects toward us. An inside corner recedes away from us. The brain knows this from experience. The Mueller-Lyer figure presents the lines and angles without depth. But since the brain expects depth, it perceives longer and shorter lines anyway. Psychologists have discovered several of these rather simple illusions. The abstract figures can be amusing brain teasers. But when the illusion isn't so abstract, it can be rather unsettling. Well, it looks like you've been fooled again. This is the very mysterious Ames room, named after its designer, Adelbert Ames. The Ames room isn't really rectangular, but your eyes can't see that. The man isn't really getting smaller. He's getting farther away. He's walking along a wall that isn't really parallel to the foreground, but actually recedes to make the Ames room a sort of triangle. But you don't know that. So you perceive him as moving sideways instead of away from you. And so your brain is forced to make an unconscious decision. Should it perceive the correct sizes of the people, or what it thinks is the correct shape of the room? Because your brain expects all rooms to be rectangles, not triangles, it decides to misperceive the people as an illusion. Not all illusions are created by expectations. Most of us are more familiar with those caused by visual defects. Here's one that's quite well known: color blindness. If you inherited the commonest form of color blindness, your world would look something like this. No reds or greens. And if you were one of a very small group of people, about 1 in 40,000, your world would look like this: the world of the totally colorblind. Now, whether they're caused by unfulfilled expectations or visual defects, illusions are perceptions that don't accurately reflect the external world. If we perceive two equal lines as unequal, or green grass is blue, the world we perceive isn't the world that exists outside our minds.
I don't know how to explain this, but I actually saw it. It actually scared me at first. Was the body of me slowly dissolving. The skin, now all the meat would go completely from under my skin. I couldn't see any blood. Finally, only the skin was hanging on the bones, and I was lying as a skeleton, but completely conscious of my heart beating and being still like I had a mind.
This man is describing his hallucination, a complete break between his own mind and the outside world. Hallucinations are not illusions. Illusions, remember, are misperceptions of things that exist outside the mind. Hallucinations happen when the brain's complex operation somehow produces perceptions which have nothing to do with anything reported by the senses. The brain's own storehouse of remembered images takes the place of incoming sensations. Reality becomes a completely internal affair. Our patient's hallucination was deliberately induced by doctors using the drug LSD. Several drugs can cause hallucinations. And so can severe mental illnesses, like schizophrenia. People who are extremely isolated can also hallucinate. Sailors alone on long voyages have reported some very strange experiences. Now, you might be thinking that none of this has anything to do with you, since you're not on drugs, or schizophrenic, or alone in the middle of the ocean. You don't live in an Ames room, and you don't hallucinate. But illusions aren't limited to abnormal or experimental conditions. Suppose you're a pilot coming in for an ordinary landing. You must make a routine judgment. How long is your runway? Well, the weather's clear, visibility is good. But can you still be fooled? Yes. Remember, your brain perceives everything within a surrounding context. Look at this exercise from a pilot training film. Which line is longer, AX or AY? AX, of course. Until we remove the background. AY and AX are actually equal. It's the principle of the Mueller-Lyer illusion. Context can create distortions. Or suppose you're a painter painting a canvas. You have a problem. It's not an unusual problem. It's inherent in the materials of painting. The world has 3 dimensions. The canvas, like the eye's retina, has only 2. How does a painter make his 2-dimensional canvas look like his 3-dimensional subject? Well, for a long time, painters didn't think they could. Then, during the European Renaissance, artists began to discover some of the clues the brain uses to perceive distance and depth. Remember aerial perspective? This painting uses it to achieve depth. The farther objects are hazier and lighter in color. And these paintings, using converging lines, linear perspective, to suggest great distance. But you may object that what's an everyday problem for a painter or an airline pilot isn't for you. Fair enough, but surely you've had this experience. What experience, I hear you saying? All I'm doing is sitting here watching an old movie. That's precisely the experience I mean. Watching a movie. A motion picture is an illusion. The images themselves don't move. They're still photographs. But when we pass enough of them fast enough in front of a light, they appear to move. Your brain can't work fast enough to perceive one image out of the hundreds flashing in front of your eyes. So it perceives one continuous image, a movie. Well, human visual perception is clearly neither simple nor foolproof. It's an immensely complicated affair, which is, at best, imperfect. But with all its flaws, this joint effort of the eye and brain is our principal means of comprehending reality. What happens when the link between eye and brain has been cut? When Arthur Tomasino was blind, he perceived the world through his other senses: hearing, touch, smell. And as we saw, these gave him a pretty good picture of the world, but not, of course, good enough for Arthur. He persuaded the doctor to perform the operation. When the bandages came off, Arthur was ecstatic.
I can see. I can see.
The operation was a success. After a lifetime of darkness, he could see. But did he have visual perception? Arthur soon discovered that the doctor had been right. Familiar objects remained familiar only to his other senses. His eyes could see, but his brain couldn't process visual sensations. Arthur's world as a sighted man wasn't what he'd hoped for. Judging actual size over distances was nearly impossible. One day he nearly fell to his death trying to examine the tiny toy cars in what he thought was a shallow gutter, several stories high. Activities that seeing should have made easier were, in fact, more difficult. As a blind man, Arthur could cross a busy street without much trouble. His hearing gave him some sense of his distance from cars, and his touch sensed his distance from the curb. But when he tried to use his eyes, he was terrified. As months went by, Arthur slid further and further into deep depression. All his life he had lived for his dream. Now he knew that the dream could never be, and he had lost more than 50 years of sight. Eventually, he returned by choice to the only world he could ever really know, the world of darkness. Arthur Tomasino is a fictitious person, but his story is created from the experiences of those very few people who actually have regained sight late in life. Their stories are sad and often tragic, but they have given psychologists data to help answer an important question. Are we born with our ability to perceive, or do we have to learn reality? As might be expected, psychologists have evidence that supports both possibilities.
What we're doing today is an experiment on how distorting goggles affect your vision. So what I'd like you to do, you see this rod out here? Just reach out under the table and point right at it. Fine, once more. Okay, now we'll put the goggles on you. And when they're on, I want you again to just point where you see the rod. Okay, hold your finger up there for a second. Okay, now these goggles are displacing your vision about 14 degrees, so you're pointing right where you see it. Now I'll give you a chance to see where you were pointing. Point again.
Oh, shit.
Come on. Just keep pointing fast.
Oh, wait a minute. There. Completely stuck.
Keep pointing.
What's remarkable here is the quickness with which the girl's brain corrects for the distortion caused by the goggles. Her brain has the flexibility to overcome inaccurate sensations. Experiments like this make some psychologists believe that we learn most, if not all, visual perception after birth. They say that perceptual flexibility is characteristic of learned human behavior, which can adapt to new circumstances, sometimes too well.
Okay, let's put this back. And just point once where you see that rod. Point right at it. Okay, fine. Now let's take the goggles off, put your arm down. You're back to normal vision. And again, point where you see the rod. Are you pointing right at it?
Yep.
Okay, let me show you where you're pointing.
Those who think visual perception is learned say that it begins early and continues all through life. A construction worker learns to perceive the world correctly from 40 stories up. Size constancy may be learned. But not everyone agrees that all visual perception is learned. It's possible that everyone is born with the ability to recognize heights and their dangers. This is the best-known experiment designed to prove that perception of depth is innate. It's the famous visual cliff. The left half of the table is patterned cloth. The right half is glass. There's a 3-foot drop under the glass. Mothers were asked to coax their infants out onto the glass. Would the child instinctively avoid the drop or trust in the glass? Watch what happened.
Aaron, here I am. Aaron, here's Mama. Hello. Hello, kitten. Oh, Aaron. Aaron. Oh, that's scary.
Here, maybe this will help.
The infants could feel the solid glass under them. But they could also see the drop. Visual perception won out over touch. Almost every baby refused to crawl onto the glass. And that, say some psychologists, shows an inherited recognition of the dangers of heights. Not everyone draws the same conclusions from the visual cliff experiments. Perhaps visual perception isn't wholly learned or innate, but both. It's a very complicated question, and it's not completely academic. The more psychologists can learn about visual perception, the better the chances for future Arthur Tomasinos to make their dreams come true. Helen Langdon looks forward to enjoying a good dinner with her family. She doesn't often have a chance. Her son's away at college. Her daughter is dieting. And even when her busy husband is home, he holds things up. Tonight, he's already asked for a 5-minute delay.
Time's up, Dick. I'm ready to serve.
Good. Just another 5 minutes, okay, dear?
Dick? I don't suppose anything will be the worse for it. Well, let's you and me go and get the salad, huh?
You said dinner'd be on time. You never keep any promises to
No,
me.
it's just 5 minutes more, honey.
When he says 5, it can be 10. It can be 15. I already told you, the kids are coming for me at 1:15.
You are not going without eating.
Who's going out on a school night?
Mom said I could.
Now, I said you could if you ate your dinner, a good dinner for once.
I don't care. If she eats a horse, she's not going out on a school night.
Honey, it's not like going out on a date. It's just Tom Robbins got a new car. He's taking the kids for a ride.
Well, that's going out.
It's just a short ride. If it gets her to eat, I think you'd cooperate.
Well, maybe if you stop nagging her, she'd do a
I
lot
don't
better.
nag.
You do too. And I'm already fat. Why do you want to get me fatter?
You're not fat, Lisa.
And you're not going out. You're going to sit there and eat your dinner. Now you've got to eat.
Even if I sat at the table, I wouldn't eat a bite.
Lisa.
There they are. I'm going.
No, Lisa,
You come
wait.
back here, you lady.
You gotta eat. What are we gonna do? How are we gonna get her to eat?
Mom's right. How do we get anyone to eat? We all have to eat in order to exist. But then why do some people refuse to eat when hunger is normal? In fact, biologically, it's a motivation for survival. Well, obviously, hunger is not only biological. For example, if you oversleep some morning, you may skip breakfast in order to get to work or to school on time. Satisfying your hunger is less important than being on time. What motivates you to eat, or to do anything, depends on a complex set of influences, both within your body and in the world around you. Psychologists have trouble describing motivation. Often when they study motivation, they observe how people behave and then try to figure out why. Did you know that the word motivation means to move? If you want something, then you move, you act, to get what you want. Sometimes it's easy. But other goals, such as exploring the moon, require greater motivation. You try to catch a ball because it's fun, or because it's an achievement, or because other kids do it. Do you need to compete? Motivation comes in many forms. Lindbergh was motivated to fly alone across the Atlantic before transatlantic flight was considered possible. Politicians are motivated to compete for high office. Maybe motivation starts with where you are, who you're with. We certainly have many motives for what we do, and hunger is no exception.
First prize today is $200. Okay, contestants, are you ready? Yeah. Judges, are you ready? Ready. On your mark, get set, eat.
The stomach or the brain tells you you're hungry, so you eat. But there are people who eat even when they're not hungry. And there are people who refuse to eat even when plenty of food is available. Why? Is the food unattractive? Does this young woman think she's unattractive? Maybe she's not getting along with her parents, or they're not getting along with each other. The point is, what we eat, where we eat, and with whom we eat are all big influences on whether we eat and how much. Motivation to eat comes from many sources. On a simple level, hunger is a biological need. Certainly, we all must eat to survive. But what gives us that biological motivation to eat? Understanding the process of digestion gives us some clues. As food digests, chemicals in your mouth and stomach break down the food you eat into simple molecules, many of them sugar molecules. Then the walls of the small intestine absorb these molecules and pass them into the bloodstream. Here, any hungry cell in the body can use the nutrients. Research suggests that part of your brain, in the hypothalamus, works like a sugar detector. When your blood sugar is low, your brain's sugar detector tells you you're hungry. And you do something about it. This sugar detector in the brain is called the feeding center. In some experiments, the feeding center is stimulated electrically. This cat has electrodes implanted in her brain. If we stimulate the feeding center electrically, the cat will eat, even though she had a big meal just before the experiment. But another part of the brain tells the cat she's had enough to eat. That's the satiation center. Stimulate this center, and even a hungry cat will refuse food. Hunger works like a thermostat. When the blood sugar drops, the feeding center switches on. You eat. So the blood sugar goes up, and the satiation center switches on, and you're no longer hungry. But it's not always that simple. Even if we remove both the feeding and satiation centers, the animal often will eat pretty much as it did before. So there must be other systems in the brain that influence hunger. Here's one, the swallow counter. The brain may actually count the number of swallows you make as you eat, and then signal when you've swallowed enough. So if you want to eat less, all you have to do is swallow more often, chew more, and eat more slowly. And your brain might say you're full long before your blood sugar goes up. But there's still more to the biological puzzle. Stomach contractions. They tell your brain you're hungry. But even if you don't eat, contractions, like these in an actual stomach, will stop, and you no longer feel hungry. So the biology of hunger is quite complicated, but it's not the only factor. Motivation to eat also includes social and cultural factors. Most of us start eating the same food, milk, often mothers. Then, as we grow, our eating habits are influenced by what foods are available. In some parts of the world, not much is available. But there is a great variety of foods in other parts of the world. Like spices of life, the types of food available and the way they are prepared vary widely, from country to country, and from culture to culture, even in the same country. Religion, too, affects the way we eat. In some religions, certain foods are taboo. Observant Jews and Muslims don't eat pork. Until recently, many Catholics didn't eat any meat on Fridays. Social and cultural factors, like law and tradition, influence the eating habits of millions of people. But even within a group, we're still individuals. And many factors other than biology, geography, and culture motivate us to eat. Perhaps you've just finished a good meal. But some things taste so good, you'll eat a lobster claw or a piece of cheesecake, even when your stomach can't possibly feel a need for food. Why? Because the food looks good? Because you're enjoying someone's company? The way you look at the world, your feelings, your emotions, are what psychologists call intrapsychic influences on what you do. Intrapsychic influences are an important part of any motivation, including hunger. The taste, sight, and feel of some foods are quite appealing. But there are others that you'd just as soon dispense with altogether. Intrapsychic influences on eating begin very early in life. Sigmund Freud had a theory that many people still think holds true. Freud noted that an infant has a very strong need to suck. A baby depends on sucking and touching for health and happiness. According to Freud's theory, if babies don't have enough opportunity to satisfy oral needs while young, later in life they'll develop an exaggerated need, as one expert put it, to exercise the mouth. Psychiatrist Dr. Robert Lynch talks about this oral stage of life.
I would suggest, for example, that in the oral phase, the child seems to have the perfect condition for life, the Garden of Eden. We all have our own story of the Garden of Eden, and it seems that there's some kind of almost internal clock mechanism within the child which determines how much actual time he needs within this perfect dependency state we might call the Garden of Eden. Now, if he's driven out of the Garden of Eden before this absolute amount of time that he needs is fulfilled, he may have certain real problems in life. These seem to manifest themselves in psychological rage, a kind of state of anger and lack of fulfillment. And he may go raging through life, sort of devouring everything in sight. He may be a consumer of the world and contribute very little himself to the world. And the kinds of things that may result from this rage will be overeating, smoking, alcoholism, the use of oral drugs.
Look at early intrapsychic influences on eating from another angle. As children, you want to please your parents, to be good. Mom seems to care if you eat. She pushes you to take one more bite, and then smiles and praises you when you do.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. Here we go. If you go to bed, I'll give you a graham cracker.
This attitude may stay with you as an adult, so that every time you feel discouraged or depressed, you eat in order to feel better, and probably something sweet.
No, I want the whole plate clean.
Many parents insist that it's virtuous to eat everything on the plate, instead of letting the child decide for herself. And then she gets sweet food as a reward. Perhaps parents should let children decide when to eat and when to stop. Then as adults, they might eat more wisely. But no matter what parents do for children, other factors enter. Often, intrapsychic and social influences combine.
You're traveling with the right crowd this time, and the drink is Coca-Cola. Coca-Cola is the right one for people on the go. Modern people, beautiful people. People who know what they want Coke. Because Coke has a tingling, upbeat taste. Keep plenty of Coke on hand, and let the world know who you are.
We can see a combination of factors influencing Lisa's eating problem. It's been difficult, but now she's beginning to take charge of her life. Lisa and her parents are in family therapy. Talking to the counselor and to each other has helped all of them. Therapy really works for many young people with Lisa's problem. She may have a disease. It's called anorexia nervosa, a chronic loss of appetite. It affects 1 out of 300 teenage girls in the United States. Lisa seemed to make dieting her whole life, but even though she lost weight, she still saw herself as being fat. Therapy helped Lisa realize this. Becoming an adult is not easy for anyone, and you may feel there's no one you can talk to. Lisa's parents are beginning to appreciate how important they are to Lisa, and that they're a family. They can talk. They can relax together. They might even enjoy dinner. Food. Ambrosia. A feast for the eyes and the palate. Most people don't have Lisa's problem. They are over, not underweight. But do overweight and underweight people share the same problems?
I've been overweight for probably about 2 years. I think I'm about 15 pounds, and I carry it mostly here and down here. And my mother's always bugging me to do it, you know, to get on the diet, and she gives me not so subtle hints. How's the diet going? Are you losing any weight? Did you step on the scale today? And she stopped asking. And I don't know. I mean, I think she's given up on me. So I'm going to do it now.
How others see you and what you think of yourself are part of the problem of overeating. One psychologist, Stanley Schachter, has concluded that people of normal weight eat when their bodies tell them to eat. That is, when their stomachs contract or when their feeding centers are active. But Schachter believes that obese people don't listen to their bodies. Just the opposite. They listen to the world around them. In the late 60s, Schachter studied both normal weight and overweight college students. The overweight ones ate a great deal more when offered good-tasting food than those of normal weight. When the food didn't taste good, overweight people ate a great deal less than normal people. Schachter also found that overweight people were plate cleaners. They ate everything, whether portions were large or small. But normal weight people left something on the plate or asked for more if the portion was smaller than what they were used to. Normal weight people seemed to eat only what their bodies needed. Overweight people were influenced by external factors. Other studies reveal other influences on obesity. For example, social and economic class affect eating habits. Men and women of the so-called upper economic classes are thinner and healthier than those of the so-called lower classes. Another social factor may be the people we love. Parents may show children love by overfeeding them. Some husbands also feel a need to make their wives fat and to keep them that way. It makes some husbands feel powerful.
Diet. Why don't you skip the diet for tonight? Richard makes a fantastic.
Enjoy it.
It's really good.
Enjoy it.
I'll give you a taste. You can have a little.
When I'm skinny and gorgeous.
Well, you look all right to me.
Some husbands think a fat wife will have to be faithful. Or maybe a man thinks having a fat wife makes it all right for him to play around.
Plum pudding,
With custard and strawberries and homemade whipped cream with almonds and cherries on the top.
Butterscotch surprise.
That's good. Butterscotch surprise.
Little Nell's chocolate fudge
That's
cake.
the one.
Indian pudding, banana.
Chocolate cake is very good.
Oh,
Yeah.
do you have any?
Chocolate fudge cake. It's like a
Do you have
brownie.
any
kind of.
strawberries?
I'll have to share.
Strawberries would be great.
Okay.
Most people do care about what they eat and how much, because they care how they look. But because there's no simple cause of obesity, losing weight is difficult. Everyone should consider what they eat because good nutrition is part of good health and vitality. But knowing what's good for you and doing something about it are two different things. It's not easy to eat only what's good for you. And advertising doesn't help. Advertising seems to motivate you to buy. And to be lazy.
Say, do you have any, are there any instructions for these?
What motivates us to eat? What makes some foods more attractive than others? Well, if you'd never seen an uncooked potato before, you might wonder what to do with it, too. It's not the shape and color that we say makes me hungry just to look at it. Not like a bunch of grapes, for example, or a piece of rich chocolate cake. But this cake might have a very different effect on someone else, someone trying to lose weight, or someone with an allergy to chocolate, or with a cultural preference for fig and nut pastries. We eat or don't eat for many, many reasons. Hunger is a basic drive, but the motivation for hunger, like any of our motivations, is a mixture of biological, intrapsychic, and social behavior. Our eating habits are the result of our total life experience.
Upon a time, there was a fine new housing project for rats. Big Rat could have his own snug burrow, stroll on its big flat roof, duck in to see his wives and children, and come out again to start his day's work. Food and water are furnished, but a good father makes sure. He runs down the steps, supplies are in order, and a look around shows all is well. His family is safe. Big Rat can rest beside the steps. But in a very short time, it seemed, the project became crowded. There was no longer room for every male rat to have a burrow for his family. Homeless males roamed the area, attacking females, marauding. Big Rat has to fight to protect his privileged status. Two marauders steal up to the very entrance of his burrow, half fearfully, taunting. Big Rat charges after them. It's a chase. Around the steps, through the buildings, and over the feeding trough. The marauders turn and fight. others joined them. Big Rat wins this time. But even now, more marauders are stalking his burrow. You see, Big Rat's Fine Housing Project is part of an experiment to test the stress of overcrowding. And there's no place else for him to go.
Stress. It's part of life for humans and animals. We experience stress every day. Modern life can be very busy and hurried. We're under stress in ordinary situations and in extraordinary situations. City life can be a hassle.
I don't have time.
Just get it there. I don't...
But even in the country, there is the pressure of time. There's always work to do. And would we get the job done if we didn't experience some stress? Work involves stress. And so does sport. The mind and body work together to prepare us for any trial, for any test, so we can rise to the occasion. When did you last experience stress? Probably today. Students certainly experience it. Children experience it too. A stressful situation can be ordinary or extraordinary. It can be exhilarating or exasperating if we lose a parking space. This has happened to a lot of us, and it really makes our blood boil. But stress is a fact of life. We all spend a lot of time experiencing stress and dealing with it. If all of these experiences are stressful, what do they have in common? Is stress all in our minds? Is it just nervous tension? Or is it all physical? At its simplest, stress results when we call upon our minds or bodies to do something they don't ordinarily do. The key to understanding the stress reaction is in our bodies. Stress is the same for people and animals. All animals depend upon the nervous system for survival. When danger strikes, the nervous system makes the body react quickly, automatically. Heart rate and blood pressure go up. Digestion stops. Breathing quickens. These automatic internal reactions to danger are called the fight or flight response, and the autonomic branch of the nervous system controls them. In contrast, the skeletal muscles are voluntary. They're controlled by a different branch of our nervous system. But certain muscles and organs in the body are mainly controlled by the autonomic nervous system. The stomach, the heart, blood vessels, and glands work automatically because of the autonomic nervous system. The autonomic nervous system has two parts. One part, the sympathetic system, stimulates organs so the body can meet an emergency. The other part, the parasympathetic nervous system, helps the body recover, preparing it for the next emergency. Adrenal glands above the kidneys are an important part of the autonomic nervous system. The adrenal glands release hormones into the bloodstream. Adrenaline and other hormones called corticoids. The secretion of adrenaline makes the heart beat more strongly and quickly. The pupils of the eyes open wide. Bladder and stomach stop working. Blood vessels constrict in the skin, making the skin pale. So blood is shunted to the muscles, to the lungs, and to the brain, where it's really needed. The liver makes more blood sugar available. Everything is prepared for action. Adrenaline is called the fight or flight hormone. Fight or flight is one way to describe the body's first response to stress. We also call it the alarm reaction. But what if the race isn't a sprint? What if it's a marathon? In other words, what if the stress is continuing? What happens to the body? Well, it enters another stage in the response to stress, the resistance stage. During this stage, the body adapts to the stress, but only for a while. If the stress still continues, the body can no longer adapt and enters a third phase, the stage of exhaustion. The body just gives in. Vital functions slow down almost to a stop. So increasing or continuing physical stress causes predictable, almost automatic changes in the body. Now, what about emotional stress? Does the human autonomic nervous system have the same response to different emotions? Like, for instance, fear, joy, and anger? The joy of receiving a gift, for example, may make the heart beat a little faster. More blood may flow to the face, something better known as blushing. But what would happen if this little girl saw a stuffed rattlesnake inside? She'd be startled, then fearful. Sweat glands would start working, and the heart rate speed up in preparation for retreat. But when her mind realized that the whole thing was just a practical joke, she'd probably get angry. Her mind might think, I am burned up, while her body would sweat to cool that burning body. Practical jokes really make some people angry. How would you react? Would you get angry? Or freeze in panic? Or just burst out laughing? Laughter, you know, is a great way to relieve stress. But the point is, anger and joy, emotions, cause basically the same physical response in the body as stress does. Does that surprise you? Did you know that you may feel as much stress just watching your favorite team score a touchdown as those players on the field experience? Now, you may be thinking, hey, wait a minute. I like watching my team win. That's not stress. Well, it is stress, good stress. The experience of stress can be good as well as bad. The distinguished scientist Hans Selye talks about bad stress and good stress, which he calls eustress in vivid terms.
I would say that stress can be good or bad for you. A very typical example is one which has made a great impression because it sounds almost impossible. The lash of a whip and a passionate kiss can, in medical terms, be equally stressful, equally conducive to the production of stress hormones such as adrenaline and corticoids and so on, And the World Health Organization used in its cover story, as its cover picture on a special number on stress, which I was asked to introduce, a young pair kissing each other passionately to show that there is eustress. It's obvious that they were under stress. They secreted adrenaline, they secreted corticoids, they showed all the many manifestations of stress, but they didn't, at least assuming that they were both adults and consenting, did not suffer distress.
Kissing. Studying. All motivation is probably based on stress of some kind. In fact, these young people might be too relaxed to study well. Would they study better with a little more stress? In the form, say, of a hard seat? Or maybe a chair with a straight back? This kind of stress can be called good stress or eustress. Physical strain is certainly a form of stress, but it can also be a source of exhilaration and great joy. Physical exercise can relieve stress too. But for some people, the competition of sport can create stress. So, good stress or bad stress? It depends on who you are and what you are like. For a lot of people, cities are a hassle. Crowds, noise, pollution. But other people see cities as places of bustle and vitality. They enjoy crowds and would not thrive in wide open spaces. But these rats had no choice. Their burrows were in an enclosed area, part of an experiment to study the effects of overcrowding. In these films of the actual study, we've seen violence flare. Rats fight or flee to corners, puzzled, confused. This rat only backs off from his pursuers. Why? And why do they pursue him? In this study, conducted a number of years ago, a rat population was kept at twice the size that could live normally in the experimental enclosure. Normal behavior patterns disintegrated. Mothers neglected babies. Fathers could not defend family burrows. Marauders moved in. Homeless rats roamed the area, pursuing the weak. And the weak retreated. They couldn't cope. And they couldn't get out. And they gave up. Results of the study highlighted effects of one type of stress and various ways of coping. Humans, too, can learn to cope in various ways. Stress is not continuous, but there is always activity in the autonomic nervous system. Either we're under stress or we're recovering, maybe relaxing. Some of us, because of our personalities or occupations, find our sympathetic systems in action much of the time. We all need some stress in our lives to be active and productive. But some of us really seem to have more stress in our lives than others. And stress can seriously affect your health.
.52, turn right heading 060.
Many jobs cause stress, but air traffic controllers suffer a far greater incidence of ulcers and other stress-related ailments than most people. This could be because air traffic controllers bear enormous responsibility for events beyond their direct control. Responsibility without control is a source of stress in many jobs. And responsibility with control, control of life or death, is a tremendous source of stress too. Surgeons and other physicians suffer more heart attacks than the general population. Heart attacks and ulcers are results of stress which we can observe and measure objectively.
I don't want to go into real estate, Marianne. I don't want to go into lumber. I don't want to do any of those things. I get fed up with, okay, I get fed up like today,
But it's hard to measure feelings and emotions.
I wouldn't be happy doing anything else. It gets in your blood. It's just part of me. I'm trained to be a cop. I've fought like a cop for years.
You know, I'm telling you something. Maybe you can't get out of it. Well, my gosh, I can get out of it.
Honey, come on. You get him. Honey, just because you're pregnant. Now, come on. Don't, please. I don't want to get into this again. It seems like it's all we fight over.
Individual feelings and personalities have a great deal to do with how each of us lives and reacts to stress. Personality is the focus of a well-known study on heart disease. This study describes two hypothetical types of people, A and B, who might react very differently to identical situations. Type B is relaxed, unhurried, uncompetitive. He or she is not likely to push self or others, takes the time to ponder problems, and often finds imaginative solutions. The Type A personality is just the opposite. He or she eagerly accepts responsibilities, is always in a hurry, and is very competitive, aggressive, and even hostile. Type A feels compelled to do more and more work. Although most personalities fall somewhere between these two extremes, we can say that people with Type A characteristics are more likely to suffer from stress and stress-related illnesses like heart disease. One Type A personality is John Murphy, executive.
I've been through enough psychological testing to have gotten the feedback that I have a tendency toward anxiety, a fairly low level of tolerance for stress. And that was an important discovery because I think that before you can really do anything about that, you really have to buy off on the idea that a lot of what you feel is stress you're doing to yourself. That events and reality in themselves are not either inherently stressful or unstressful. They're facts that exist, and whether they're stressful depends an awful lot on your interpretation of them and how you react to them and whether you let them bother you or not.
When do we learn about stress? Many of our adult reactions to stress are learned in childhood. When we first find ourselves at odds with our parents, we're faced with stress. A little boy and dinner time. Mom says, "Stop playing and wash your hands before Daddy comes home." The boy says, "No." Mom says, "Oh, yes." And the little boy's sympathetic nervous system goes into action. Now, he either argues or runs away. But he learns that what he does may change a stressful situation. Meeting stress helps him learn to feel responsible for his actions. But he may find that neither fighting nor fleeing works, especially after Dad comes home. Then he has no outlet for his stress. If Dad says, "You do what I say right now or else," the boy can't fight or flee. He may learn just to prevent the stress or block it out by becoming depressed. Or as an adult, he might use what psychologists call defense mechanisms to cope with stress. Take, for example, regression. Behaving like a child in a stressful situation, like an argument.
wash day in and day out. And Garth, this is the very last one.
Two can play at that game.
Don't you dare throw that dish! Don't you tell me what to do!
At parties, a lot of us use defense mechanisms to cope with stress. One person might pretend to be having fun when he's not. Someone else might say that others feel the way she really does.
This party is so incredibly dull. Look at these people. They're bored stiff.
Stress. It can be bad or good. And we all have to deal with it, to cope, whatever our personality type. Even though modern life and our individual personalities and occupations may create stress for us, we can cope. We can deal with stress effectively. There are many healthy ways to cope with stress. Some, like jogging, improve our physical and mental health, which makes us better able to deal with stress. For some individuals, physical exercise alone is enough to relieve the effects of stress. But many people need complete rest, and there are techniques for them. Some have been around for centuries. Yogis, Zen monks, and others have long practiced meditation and describe it as totally relaxing. On the simplest level, meditation is a way to achieve a peaceful state of body and mind. Body and mind can work together to control reactions to stress in a new technique called biofeedback. This man is about to undergo biofeedback training. He's going to learn how to reduce the amount of muscle tension as measured by the electrical activity emanating from muscles on his forehead. What it means is he's learning how to regulate his own system internally, the internal physiological processes. When it's important to relieve or reduce the stress in your life, how you do it doesn't really matter, so long as it suits your personality.
Get it there. I don't care how.
Some people suffer too much stress, but when there's too little, people become bored and unproductive. Finding the right amount of stress is never easy. If the strings of a violin are too loose, they moan and groan. If they're too tight, the result is a screech. But when the instrument is properly tuned, we get music. Many people think stress is destructive, but that's not always true. There is good stress and bad stress. Stress is a necessary part of life. But we need to balance stress and relaxation. Without any stress, there are no challenges and no growth. Just as a marathon runner needs stress to train, each of us needs stress to develop any capacity, mental or physical. By being in touch with ourselves, we can help mind and body achieve an optimum level of stress. Too much or too little is a problem, but it's the kind of problem that can be solved.
circus because I was going to be a circus star, not one of the little girls who walk in the parade. I was going to be a real performer. There's a circus training school in our town, and I begged Mom to send me. She said it'd be real hard work. I didn't care. And she said this year I would watch all the acts real carefully, so I would be sure what I wanted to be. I love them all. Tumblers, animals, trainers, and high wire. But I knew what I wanted to be, a trapeze acrobat. I wanted to fly through the air. When the training school started, I was scared and excited. And we began on push-ups, handstands, and I was thrown in the air a lot. I didn't understand. Where was the trapeze? They said I had to learn step by step, train special muscles for each special movement, and I didn't always do it right. So we did it over and over, but still no trapeze, stretching, somersaults, and even how to bow. And then, the day they said I was ready for the trapeze, ready to put it all together, but I was scared. They helped. They told me I'd be fine, and they helped me push off. And I was doing it. I was flying. I could already see myself as I was going to be, the star of the trapeze.
Serena's on her way to becoming the circus star she dreams of being. She's not yet flying through the air with the greatest of ease, and much of her training will still be push-ups and flips. But she'll do them with the sparkle in her eye that comes from keeping her goal in mind. Her training is what psychologists call operant conditioning. Operant conditioning is simply learning done step by step. There's nothing new about step-by-step learning, but for many of us, it's a random hit-or-miss process. In operant conditioning, the steps are carefully guided, and each successful step is rewarded. Look at these two pigeons playing ping pong. What's the reward for them? Here's a man learning to wiggle his ears. What's his reward? And what do the pigeons and the man have in common? They've learned tricks, and they've learned them through practice. The pigeons get a food reward when they score, and maybe the man thinks he'll be a hit at parties. The food and the recognition are the rewards we call positive reinforcement. Most of us respond to rewards each day.
Derek's ready. Derek's looking up here. Good job.
A word of praise in school, a professional pat on the back. Both are positive reinforcements.
12 again. 12. 12 right here. You are perfect.
Mom, I'm hungry.
We're going to have dinner in 20 minutes.
I want an ice cream cone.
You can't have an ice cream cone.
In some situations that we don't think of as learning situations, we use rewards incorrectly. We reward the wrong behavior. Not intentionally. But what behavior is this child learning? What is he being rewarded for? The boy's mother rewarded his tantrum. He has learned that a tantrum will get him what he wants. His mother could have punished him. Sometimes punishment works, but the goal of learning is to bring about permanent change in behavior. Human beings often seem to respond to punishment, but the effect may be temporary. The first clue to changing behavior by a learning process came from Ivan Pavlov in the early 1900s. Dogs salivate naturally in response to food, but when food and the sound of a bell appear together time after time, the dogs associate the bell with food. Eventually, they salivate merely from hearing the bell. This learning is called classical conditioning. But Pavlov's experiments were restricted to involuntary physiological responses. What about other responses other than the basic physiological ones? Researchers began to study conditioning in learned behavior. Watch this sea lion, for example. He's learning to catch rings because he's trained to associate catching rings with a reward of tasty, fresh fish. First, he's warmed up with a fish snack. He catches the ring. And gets another fish reward. Oops, the trainer dropped a ring, so the sea lion takes care of it and reminds her that she's missing a ring. That tap on the leg seems spontaneous, but it's part of the act, learned through conditioning. The sea lion has been conditioned to perform each step in the act. Conditioning seems to work well for animals, but what about people? Actually, where simple behavior is involved, a human being doesn't act much different than an animal. This clown on water skis learned his act for the rewards of applause and a living, and he maintains his skill through practice. Practice makes perfect is a familiar phrase, and it wasn't new 50 years ago when psychologist Edward Thorndike called it his first law of learning. Thorndike was attempting to analyze the learning process. Most of us practice eagerly when we feel that we're making progress toward a goal. Riding a bike, balancing on a beam, careful to make each step right. We learn, as in typing, through practice. But practice makes perfect only when we can see improvement. This was Thorndike's second law, the law of effect. It states, very simply, that seeing improvement is essential to the learning process. This woman's rapid typing shows the result of practice, but the speed would be useless if the typing was inaccurate. She learned accuracy through the law of effect, watching her improvement and repeating what she saw was right. An active sport like water skiing can help us see how Thorndike's two laws of learning work. First, the law of practice. This woman starts on dry land so that she can see what motions may work. Then, into the water for a try. Oops, that didn't work. She won't do that again. But some more tries. She sees improvement, and she's demonstrating the law of effect. She's water skiing. Thorndike's laws were a start toward understanding the learning process. Other researchers analyzed the learning process in more detail. This man, psychologist B.F. Skinner, broke the process down to specific steps. He described the step process as shaping. He called this shaping a major factor in operant conditioning and believed that operant conditioning could control all animal or human behavior. In one experiment, Skinner trained pigeons to turn in a circle to get food pellets. First, the pigeon is taught to turn part of the way, then further, until the pigeon makes a whole turn. A boy can can also be trained to behave in certain ways to get food. He's been conditioned to getting it by putting a quarter in a machine. What happens when the boy puts a quarter in the machine and he doesn't get a soda?
That's beautiful. Thanks.
Hey, that's really good work.
Why, thank you.
It looks beautiful. You're doing a real good job.
Skinner emphasized that the pigeon and the boy behaved as they did because of the food rewards, the positive reinforcers. But positive reinforcement comes in many forms besides food. Many ways that people are rewarded for behavior, but there is also negative reinforcement. These rats jump to avoid the electric shock. Avoiding the shock is called negative reinforcement. What reinforcement is this girl receiving?
What's that supposed to be?
A tree.
Doesn't look like a tree to me.
When the girl decides to stop painting to avoid criticism, it's negative reinforcement. Conditioning occurs constantly in our lives, and we often don't even recognize it. Animal trainers use operant conditioning to achieve a specific goal. Take this bear, Toko, for example. How would you train Toko to climb on a stool, sit down, and turn around? This trainer shows how this trick is broken down into a series of steps. First, Toko explores the territory. Knowing that food will appear, he tries different behaviors. The researcher reinforces the food with a sound when Toko makes the right response. The reward for the exploratory behavior shapes Toko's response in the right direction. Very quickly, Toko learns which response is being encouraged. Once Toko has learned the first step, the trainer works to get the second foot on the stool. Toko gets his reward when he puts the other foot on the stool. Soon, Toko has all 4 feet on the stool. Then he learns to sit. He's rewarded for a slight turn. And finally, he does a full turn. He's rewarded again. And here's the full trick. Toko was eager to learn throughout the experiment. He knew he would be rewarded quickly, and he actively searched for the behavior that would earn the reward. Now Toko can perform the trick over and over. The training is a success. Applying operant conditioning to human beings is accomplished in much the same way. Anna, a retarded child who has never walked unassisted, was the subject of a dramatic conditioning experiment. Anna makes her way back and forth between chairs to eat spoonsful of ice cream. Gradually, the distance between chairs increases. Soon she is using a rope for support. Then the rope is slackened. And cut. For a while, she still falls when the rope is taken away. Until finally, she is walking without any help at all. So operant conditioning can shape many kinds of both human and animal behavior through positive reinforcement. In some circus acts today, even the wild animals are trained with the most gentle of reinforcers, love. These tigers are fierce, dangerous, man-killers. They're fed raw meat and would eat any meat thrown in the cage. Usually when tigers are trained for circus acts, they learn their tricks through whippings and cruel punishment. But a trainer named Harry Thomas uses a different system.
I use a type of training which I call affection training, and in this we've gotten away from the old school, which we call the whip, gun, and chair type of thing, and we use more of a one-to-one relationship with the animal. We try to find what tricks or behaviors best suit the cat. Usually I watch the cats playing, and in playing I see a particularly good jumping cat or a rollover cat, and so then we reward the cat from there and pick up what it does best instead of trying to force it into something.
And a tiger stands over Harry Thomas, who puts himself at the mercy of his animals. It's actually part of the performance, but nevertheless a risk of life. Is he certain of the tiger's affection for him, or of the permanence of his training? One or the other, because there's no way he could get to his feet in time to run from a suddenly attacking tiger. Training animals is a familiar use of operant conditioning, but psychologist Skinner was convinced that all animal and human behavior is only the product of operant conditioning. However, Skinner's theory, called behaviorism, met a great deal of criticism. His colleagues challenged his attitude that if you can't measure it, forget it. Operant conditioning doesn't cover all varieties of human behavior, they said. Creativity, for example. When a sculptor chisels the smooth curves of his vision from a rough chunk of stone, how much of his sculpture is practice and how much is the workings of his mind? Creativity, said Skinner's critics, is difficult, if not impossible, to measure. And what about motivation? Some people climb mountains. They're not on their way to someplace on the other side of the mountain. They just climb mountains. What is the motivation? Some may climb to look down on the beauty of the land below, or because climbing is an exhilarating sport, or because overcoming dangers gives a sense of conquest. But all climbers practice and plan many hours for these moments in the beauty and danger of the mountain. They condition body and mind to respond without thinking to what must be done when a rope slackens or a foothold crumbles. Survival is motivation for the training. But why risk death to reach the top of a mountain? We can't measure the motivations of other people, but we do know that each of us is motivated towards certain goals. Skinner had trouble explaining motivation in terms of operant conditioning. Motivation is an internal force rather than an external reward. And animals also have moments when they seem capable of more complex forms of learning. One researcher did an experiment, now famous, in which a chimp named Sultan demonstrated a flash of insight. In the original experiment, the chimp was confronted with some bananas that were out of reach. No matter what Sultan tried, he got no closer to the bananas. Then Sultan was offered 2 sticks. Sultan eyed the sticks and the bananas for several hours. Aha! Sultan had realized that he could join the sticks and use them to pull the bananas closer. His sudden realization is called an aha, or insight response. But we still don't understand insight. Is it a single leap to a conclusion, an explosive aha, or is it a series of tiny steps? Skinner's theories did not explain Sultan's insight response any better than they explained an artist's creativity or a mountain climber's motivation. And what about language? In this classroom, tapes and headphones help these students learn French. They listen to experts speak the language. They repeat. They listen again, each controlling his own equipment at his own pace. They learn much, but the possible combinations of words and thoughts within a language are so numerous that all of them can't be learned by practice. New combinations appear constantly in writing and speaking. And Skinnerian theory has trouble explaining the arts in behaviorist terms. People can learn to use the tools of an artist's trade, but the artist's vision can't be taught. True, technical experience and training and practice are valuable. But something more is needed for true art. An opera, for example, combines many arts. Where do the results of practice leave off and the inspiration begin? For all the behaviors operant conditioning might not explain, it does apply in many ways. Learning football plays is an example.
What are they called?
Offensive team.
They're called the offensive team. That's right, Earl. Go ahead and take a drag.
Earl is mentally retarded. He's a good example of a person unable to affect the things that go on around him. He is silent, withdrawn, and he smokes 4 packs of cigarettes a day. In an attempt to help Earl talk with other patients about things they are interested in, his teacher uses operant conditioning to teach him some of the basics of football. Earl gets a puff on his cigarette as a reward for correct answers. He develops the fundamentals of communication, and because he is talking, he has less time to smoke cigarettes. He has learned to control himself and his environment in a small way.
That's good, Earl. Take a drag.
Biofeedback also relies on the principles of operant conditioning to cure headaches or lower blood pressures. It also requires a goal and a step-by-step way of getting there. The biofeedback machine simply allows you to see physiological changes recorded as electronic impulses. Aversion therapy is another, more rigorous therapy that uses operant conditioning. Can't stop smoking? This woman receives a jolt of electricity as she goes through her smoking ritual. Soon, her body makes the connection between the smoking routine and the unpleasant shock.
Is that painful?
No, it's uncomfortable.
Okay, fine. We'll call that your level then.
As a result of the conditioning, the woman may become less inclined to smoke. This aversion therapy uses punishment. The woman is rewarded for stopping smoking. The reward is that she does not get shocked. Heavy drinkers are also candidates for aversion therapy. This man has electrodes attached to his fingers, and he will receive a shock as he takes a drink. He will soon relate the shock to the drink, and he may think twice before drinking heavily in the future. Such harsh conditioning may be necessary when behavior is out of control. And operant conditioning can be useful in the inevitable battle of the bulge. Your eating habits can also be conditioned. But the most effective form of weight loss involves learning new eating behaviors. Most weight loss programs modify eating habits step by step and use progress records as reinforcement. This girl weighs herself every evening and writes down her step-by-step results. The results can be a tremendous reward. Operant conditioning is basically an optimistic approach to teaching and learning. And yet there's been controversy over Skinner's theories. But Skinner has made us conscious that learning by reward is an effective tool. He may have fitted one of the pieces in the puzzle of human behavior.